The headline of our assessment is that the recession is deeper in 2020 than we projected in April. The recovery is going to be slower in 2021 than we projected in April. But the actions governments have taken have put a floor under the world economy and are preventing a massive wave of bankruptcies or unemployment.
That was the managing director of the IMF describing just how bad the economic outlook over the next few years actually will be, and this economy could potentially be the one that Joe Biden would inherit as president, of course.
So currently voters seem to trust Biden more on all issues except the economy. The latest CNBC poll showed that 44% of voters favor President Trump's economic policies over Biden's. But joining us now to talk more about the impact of coronavirus on the economy and its longevity is Professor of Economics Richard Wolff. Professor Wolff, thanks so much for joining the show again. It's good to see you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So, Professor Wolff, I mean, one of the things we were talking a little bit about in the break is that you're very worried about the state of the economy, and you see a lot of structural deficiencies that are ready, possibly like a house of cards that could fall. What is it that you're seeing, sir? Could you outline it?
Yes, let me give you just two or three of the key kind of dimensions. In April and May, roughly half of all commercial establishments in the United States did not pay their rent because they couldn't. They weren't functioning. They weren't getting any revenue. Okay, that meant their landlords were put in a jam. Why? Because the rentals that tenants pay to their commercial landlords is what the commercial landlords use to pay off their debts to the banks. So the failure to pay rent to the landlord of your commercial establishment plunges the banks and the landlords and the tenants into a mushrooming crisis. They have all now turned to their lawyers. They are all getting ready to go into court to fight. All the old leases, all of the old arrangements that keep capitalism going are now defunct. And they're going to be fought out in terms of who has the most money to hire the most lawyers to win this game. This is kind of a situation in which a structure doesn't function anymore, and it's everybody for themselves in a war of all against all, and that never ends very well. Number two, the Federal Reserve has now made a decision about a week ago to start buying corporate bonds in the secondary market. What that effectively means is that the government is backstopping the entire credit apparatus of the United States. It already stands behind most homes through the mortgage systems that we've developed since the 30s, and now it is standing behind all the corporate loans because, in effect, it becomes the banker of last resort. Any idea that the economy is now, quote unquote, a free private enterprise economy is downright silly, as well as ideologically backward. We now have an economic system utterly dependent on the creation of money by our central bank. I could go on, but these are signs of disintegration of one kind of economic system and the transition towards another one. It's not clear exactly where this will end. But as I said to you, this is a level of breakdown that is really impossible for me to find in the prior history of our capitalism, at least since the Civil War.
And so, I mean, you just basically said there are no historical analogies, because that was going to be my next question. Like, what period is this analogous to? I mean, can we find any strains or any parallels from any experiences in American or world history?
Really, that's the best question, because it's our only guide to what to do now is to have some sense of what we did in the past. The problem with the only parallel, which is the Great Depression of the 1930s, was that the political reaction then, compared to what we've had so far now, is so different. In the 1930s, a massive movement politically to the left occurred. You know, the CIO, the greatest union organizing period in American history, never had anything like it before. We've never had anything like it since. Two powerful socialist parties, a communist party, they all worked together, and they produced the pressure that got FDR to make a New Deal. We've had almost the opposite. We've had a lurch to the right, at least for the last 15, 20 years, culminating now in President Trump and all that he's doing. with the unions weaker than they've been in half a century, with socialist and communist parties almost extinct, and certainly with minimal influence. So we don't have any of the pressures that might give us some sense of what to do. So we're left with this, the kind of vague hope that there would be something comparable now to what emerged in the 1930s. But here, then, your point about Biden at the beginning is crucial. He's not that. Bernie Sanders might have been that, but Mr. Biden and the people around him are not the kind to learn from our history what did work in the 1930s to finally get us out. We don't even have that now, and that's what makes me so worried about our situation.
Right, and Professor, let's talk about, because I think people can get carried away, or they may not be able to understand the ramifications of what you're saying. What are the downstream ramifications to the average consumer and worker in the economy that we're beginning to transition to?
Very good. Let's start with the unemployment. We have record unemployment. In the shortest amount of time, we've had over 42 million people file for unemployment compensation. There is no precedent for something happening that deep, that terrible a cut in that short a period of time. When you have unemployment like this, the way capitalism as a system works, this level of unemployment sends an unmistakable message to every single employer. Whether that person is a nice person, a not nice person, greedy, not greedy, really doesn't matter. What every employer knows is you can now go to your workers and say to them, often quite honestly, I've had a hard time, the pandemic has hurt me, the crisis has hurt me, I'm going to have to cut your wages by 20%. I'm going to have to contribute less to your benefits. You're going to have to come in a half hour earlier. You're going to have to stay longer, and your lunch is going to be shorter. I'm very sorry, but you and I both know that if you don't accept these conditions, there are 40 million people out there who will be grateful, since they're so worried about whether they'll have a job when this is over and what the conditions of that job will be. So here's what's coming, and that's why I'm a little down about it. We're going to have a compression, which is a nice word, a diminution, a reduction in the standards of living and the standards of consumption in the years ahead, unless something drastically changes, because that's how our system works. Even if you're an employer who wouldn't want to take advantage of the situation, your competitors will be doing it, and then you'll be forced, on pain of your own survival, to do likewise. No one that I hear is talking about what is going to be done and what is going to happen to the consciousness, the feelings, the attitudes, the politics of the American working class as it goes through what I just described.
So I have a feeling that Joe Biden is not going to be giving you a call anytime soon, unfortunately. But if he did, what would you advise them to do?
The first thing I would do is something very simple. Learn from the Germans. And I could, by the way, give you other countries, the Japanese, the French, the British, but I'm going to use the Germans. At the beginning of the pandemic, in middle March, the German unemployment rate was 5%. Today, the German unemployment rate is 6%, a marginal increase. We quadrupled our rate of unemployment from about 4.5% to roughly 17 to 18% now. That's crazy. The German working class doesn't face the problems we do because the condition for getting help from the German government was you fire nobody. If you won't fire anybody, we won't give you the wherewithal to get out of this mess. All the German industry accepted this deal. Nobody in Germany, virtually nobody, lost their job. They're not anxiety-ridden about getting one back. The job is there for them. And the government picked up 70% to 80% of the wage bill to manage this situation. For the life of me, I do not understand why Mr. Biden and the people around him don't understand what I just said, why that is so much better for the mass of the people, and why, by the way, it would mean, if you did that and the workers in Germany stay home, you wouldn't see the pressure to go back to work as desperate desperately unemployed people want to resume some kind of normal life because they kind of get it where things are going and they don't want to be lost in that process. Our whole politics would be different in a much better way if we just took that lesson.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more, sir. Well, we really appreciate you joining us and your analysis, Professor. Thanks.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely. We'll have more Rising for you after this.